This insane-looking, mid-engine, carbon fiber, all-wheel drive supercar was $136,000 when it was new a few years ago, and now you can pick it up for less than the price of a Toyota Camry. But should you? The BMW i8 was supposed to be a world-changing sports car, or is it a supercar that was supposed to change the way you look at performance? And nowadays, these revolutionary cars can be had for under $50,000, even under $40,000. One just sold on Cars and Bids for just $37,000. So should you buy one? The BMW i8 made its debut in 2011 in a Mission Impossible movie, the one with Tom Cruise. That's every Mission Impossible movie. But it looked so phenomenal in 2011 in that movie, and production started in 2014, and it looked just as phenomenal in 2014 and lasted through 2020. They made 20,400 i8s, which is pretty good for a nuts, insane, mid-engine, carbon fiber, turbocharged hybrid supercar, if you ask me. The tech in that car was pretty astonishing considering development started, some 15 years ago. 3 different powertrains, an electric motor in the front for the front axle that makes 129 horsepower, one in the rear coupled with a 1.5 liter turbocharged 12-valve 3-cylinder gasoline engine, a full carbon monocoque, all-wheel drive, and 2 transmissions, a 2-speed in the front for the electric motor and a 6-speed Aisin in the back for the gasoline powertrain. That was everything. They just threw everything they had at this car and over-engineered the crud out of it. The biggest misconception of the BMW i8 is that this is a slow car. And there is some validity in that because they see 3 cylinders, right? And there's nothing sporty about a 3-cylinder. I mean, it kind of reminds me of a Geo Metro. And then they hear 357 horsepower, which doesn't sound like a lot, especially by modern standards, and it really isn't a lot. But this is the most underrated 357 horsepower I have ever seen. 420 pound-feet of torque, so the torque number is pretty good, but the performance in this car is way beyond what you read on paper. And let me talk to you about the different modes. So starting off, we're just driving around in EV mode right now. You get about 15 miles on these early cars of pure electric mode. Now it's essentially a front wheel drive car, and if I put the pedal down, it kind of moves okay, but it doesn't feel very quick. Comfort, maybe a little bit more. It might be more willing to actually kick on the gasoline engine, but if I put it in a sport mode, that keeps the gasoline engine on all the time. And if I put it in sport mode and come to a stop and then push the traction control off button and put it into the sport traction control setting and then go hard on the brake, hard on the gas, that'll engage launch control, and the launch of this car, pretty freaking nuts actually. This car back in the day did a 3.80 to 60 according to Motor Trend and a quarter mile in 12.4 seconds, which is pretty freaking fast. Now, it's not Tesla Model S Plaid fast, but I don't care who you are, a quarter mile in 12.4 is really moving. And in fact, we ran this car up against our brand new Ford Mustang GT on the quarter mile strip we have that we use. Rough surface, unprepped surface. This car demolished the Ford. We'll include that clip now. The i8 actually shifts super hard.
Oh, he launched well. Oh, wow. That i8 is so quick off the line. That's insane.
There's 85 miles an hour and 90 miles an hour and 100 miles an hour.
Oh, I've never seen something take off from this Mustang like that. This Mustang is quick. No way.
Pretty crazy, right? I mean, 13 seconds flat at a mile above sea level on a rough surface without rollout means that at sea level on a smooth surface with rollout, this is easily a mid 12-second car, which is really moving. Even though it only says 357 horsepower, this car, it feels quick, especially once you get that little 3-cylinder on boost. That combined with the immediacy of the electric motor means that it really, really boogies. The problem with the BMW i8 is this car came out roughly the same time as the Holy Trinity. The Holy Trinity was, of course, the Porsche 918, the McLaren P1, and the Ferrari LaFerrari, and several of those cars used a innovative hybrid drivetrain, just like the BMW. Except, unlike the BMW, they didn't have a little tiny 3-cylinder engine. They had these big honking V8s, which meant they were insanely powerful, insanely fast, but also insanely expensive. However, unfortunately, they kind of took some of the limelight away from the BMW i8 because with its little 3-cylinder and its significantly lower price point, it never really saw the media attention I think it deserved. This BMW i8 is 10 years old, and this is a design that came out 11 years ago, and it could come out 11 years from now and still look modern. That's how attractive this car is. You drive it around and people ask you what brand new BMW is that. It is so distinctive looking. It's probably, in my opinion, the most attractive BMW maybe ever. The low front end, the reasonably sized kidney grills, and it gets better the further back you go. So these wheels were actually really unique. i8 wheels are directional on all 4 corners. They're meant to face one direction, so you often see them mixed around and looking a little weird. You've got this big aggressive vent in the front, which looks super cool, this unique 2-tone design, and then the side super low, the exposed carbon on the roof, and then we come to the flying buttresses and these scoops along the back which funnel air toward the rear with these LED taillights. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on about the looks of this car, but it is just phenomenal. It is such a good looking car, and it still looks brand new all these years later. Shockingly, BMW applied the same design treatment to the inside. Now, they could have taken a 3 Series interior, slapped it in here and called it a day, and certainly there are elements that are part shared with the i8 and other cars, but it is so cool looking in here. The way that the vents are incorporated in the dash and those weird 2 vents there on the passenger side, the sloping lines that face toward the driver, the dual cockpit look, the unique steering wheel with the paddle shifters, the blue stitching, the blue seat belts. This is such a cool interior. It still, once again, looks good in 2025, other than the screen, which is looking a little small now, and of course the fact that it has buttons, which no cars have nowadays. This is a really attractive interior, and it's held up incredibly well all these years later. This car simulates engine sound on the inside. Actually, that 3-cylinder, even on the outside, doesn't sound terrible when you're on boil, but the simulated sound on the inside is genuinely pretty cool. I know people hate on simulated sound, but we're in an era where you can buy a performance car with a fake manual transmission in the Ioniq 5N. So why not have simulated sound if it works? And it actually really sounds really convincing in the BMW i8. Now, what about handling? This is not going to be a track car. There's no way around it, right? It's got pretty narrow tires front and rear. They are staggered front and back, but still pretty narrow. Suspension is also pretty soft. But if you read the reviews online, people make this thing sound like it handles like a cabbage cart, a medieval wheelbarrow. It's actually very, very competent, considering the car only weighs 3,484 pounds. That's right, you get an all-wheel drive hybridized car for under 3,500 pounds. This is a lightweight vehicle, folks, and therefore it handles like such. It's actually really nimble. The steering is not all that dead. You get a little bit of feedback, and the suspension is willing to work with you, and the brakes are awesome. Sure, it's not gonna set a Nürburgring lap record, but for where you folks are gonna be driving this car, at least in the US, on relatively straight roads with bumps in them like we're doing right now, this thing is perfect. It is surprisingly comfortable, really quiet, and great for road trips. And it can be fast if it needs to be. So now we have to talk about the reason you can pick up these cars for so cheap, or at least the perceived reason as to why you can pick up these cars for so cheap. We bought that exact car with just over 30,000 miles for $48,000, and one just sold on Cars and Bids with about 80,000 miles for $37,000, which is crazy. And of course, the reason you're probably thinking these cars have gotten so cheap is because they are a reliability nightmare. You have a motor in the front, a motor in the back, an engine in the back, a transmission in the front, a transmission in the rear, a full carbon drivetrain, all sorts of electronics. So let's dive in deep and talk about reliability. So I had a great conversation with my buddy Franny, who's one of the most talented German car mechanics I know. Her and Heidi run a great YouTube channel you have to check out. She owns one of these heavily depreciated i8s, and we talked a lot about reliability, which is why I'm opening up the rear hatch to show you nothing, because you can't actually see the engine. But we had a long conversation about some of the common issues surrounding i8s, and here's what I learned. The big one you're going to read about online is an AC problem. Essentially, the impeller explodes, sending shrapnel through the AC system, and that's bad news because the hybrid battery is actually cooled off of that AC cooling loop, and if that becomes blocked, the high voltage battery can overheat, resulting in a pretty sizable bill. Bummer. She was saying, though, it's a pretty noticeable problem when it starts to fail. You get a lot of noise from that AC compressor, and she also believes that the issue is highly overblown, that not that many i8s will have that impeller implosion. But that is something worth noting on BMW i8s. Not super crazy expensive to rectify, but something that can be a problem. Another common problem with the BMW i8 is the fuel pressure sensor. So there's a little button here that I have to push to open up the fuel door. So now I should be able to, there we go, open up the fuel door. Oh, that's the electricity door. Me. A very embarrassing moment for Tommy Micah, but let me get back on track. There is a fuel pressure sensor in these cars that can lock the fuel door closed if it fails. Now, the reason for this is a little confusing if you're used to a typical gasoline car, but plug-in hybrids have a pressurized fuel tank and fuel system, and it has to release that pressure before it lets you open the cap so you don't get gas in your face. And in order to make sure you don't get gas in your face, it'll lock the fuel door closed. Now, if the sensor fails, there is a manual override you can use to release the fuel door. Oh God. Push the button again. There, you hear that little click, and now we can open it, and now we can put gas in the car. Fuel pressure sensor failures, somewhat common, can be kind of expensive to rectify, but that is a problem you should definitely know about. The next common failure point on i8s are the door struts. These big old guys right here that keep the doors open when you push the button and open the doors. That's a terrible way to explain that, but basically it prevents the door from falling on your head. Franny said that these can fail, kind of like a wear item. She said she typically replaces these about every year, so that's something worth noting. Now, another potential failure point on i8s is the low voltage battery. These cars have two electrical systems, the high voltage for powering the motors and the regen and that kind of thing, and the low voltage for the radio and the lights and all the little ancillaries. The low voltage batteries can fail. Doesn't seem like a big deal to replace, except apparently BMW asks you do it at their service center so they can tell the computer when the high voltage battery was replaced, so it's not trying to charge a new battery like a 3-year-old battery because the computer has a battery date code. Not entirely sure if I buy that, but it is an AGM battery that can go bad. Not the end of the world. It's not the high voltage battery. That's a whole nother can of worms, but something worth noting. And then lastly, kind of a weird problem that is upgradable, but these early cars have a 3G cell setup for connecting via the internet, stuff like the app, which is pretty cool. And unfortunately, the world has completely maybe not the world, the US has discontinued 3G altogether, which kind of limits some of the app functionality, what you can do with this car. Apparently, you can upgrade the system to a more modern internet connection, but it is going to cost you. But first, you have to really sit on the sill, ruining your prom dress or your black slacks. So we talked about some of the really good things about the BMW i8. We talked about some of the reliability myths, if you want to call them that. Let's talk about some of the bad stuff. The first being the egress and entry. I think that's the correct word for it. The getting in and out of the i8, commonly complained about online, and it is unfortunately very true. These cars are extremely hard to get in and out of. Now, I am a fairly decrepit 27-year-old, but even I, with my sort of lean stature, has a bit of a hard time getting out of this car. Part of it is the butterfly doors, you know, do limit some of your headroom. The bigger problem, though, is the sill is the size of Kansas, and it's not just a flat sill, it sticks up above the base of the seat. So what you have to do is you go butt first, which is usually something I don't advise for in normal life, but then you swing your legs in and then you can get in, and then getting out is the reverse. You do legs first and then you lean your weight on the sill and kind of crawl your way out of this. Now, Mary brought up the good point too. What if you weren't a somewhat decrepit 27-year-old? What if you had a prom dress? You'd have an even more interesting time. To preserve your modesty, you would have to probably sit on the sill and fall on the ground, ruining your prom dress or your black slacks in this example. And then you couldn't do this, so you would have to turn around, please. My modesty, Mary. There we go. Involves a lot of spinning around. No, all kidding aside, getting out of this car is a real pain. My dad's actually in pretty good shape for a 60-year-old man, and he struggles with it a little bit. Someone like my grandpa, in a million years, he would have to be buried in the car. because he would never get out. This is Mary trying to get in like what she claims is a normal person. Mary, can you get out of this car looking cool? that was not it. And that brings us to the big one, the high voltage battery health. Now in these early cars, it's about 7 kilowatt hours. In the later cars, it's closer to 12 kilowatt hours. It made them a little bit bigger. And of course, we've all read the headlines. McLaren P1 needs a battery, $250,000, right? Porsche 918 needs a battery replacement, $100,000, right? These are some insane bills. And the good news is BMW i8s do not fall into that camp. I've done a bunch of research on the matter. I've talked to Franny, consulted some other people, and these high voltage batteries are holding up remarkably well. Similar setup to what you're going to find in the BMW i3. Andre has close to 80 or 100,000 miles on an i3. It's just as healthy as the day we bought it all those years ago. This car, 10 years old, has 40,000 miles. Originally it was supposed to do about 15 miles on a charge. Now it'll do about 12. So it's lost maybe a little bit of range, but not that bad. And as long as you don't let these cars sit for super long to the point where the high voltage battery goes into the 0% range, they really seem to be holding up well. And if you do need a new high voltage battery, they still built over 20,000 of these cars. I found one on eBay for about $8,000. So not all that expensive if it goes wrong. And quite honestly, folks, they're just not failing that badly. Other thing worth noting, the 1.5 liter turbo engine in this car, it's more or less a similar engine to what you're going to find in the base model Mini Cooper. And those cars, even though no one will admit it online, have been phenomenally reliable. I've seen them online with 150, 200,000 miles, and they still seem to be trucking along. A lot of people in my mini group have them, and they just love them. They don't have any reliability issues. And even more surprising than that, Franny said these cars are shockingly easy to maintain. Spark plugs are easy, oil changes are easy. The big downfall with these is, and they've kind of fixed some of the problems with an update, but you can really get these cars into high pressure, high boost situations when the engine is stone cold. If you're in EV mode and you go full throttle, it will give you max boost because the car thinks you need all the power, and then you're putting a lot of wear on that engine, right? And that's potentially how Sam Cracks had that famed head gasket failure, right? Someone abuses these cars, sure, they're gonna probably give you problems, but for the most part, folks, they're holding up super, super, super well. They really, really are. I don't see a lot of horror stories about i8s online.
What's a mini group? It's like an Alcoholics Anonymous.
A mini group is like, yes, it's like an AA, except it encourages you to buy more Mini Coopers. That's right. Great question, Mary. It's a very dangerous club. I've personally ended up spending thousands because of it. Lift and open. The rear glass of the i8 reveals the trunk, or what there is of it. Now, this area here looks like it could be for storage. I would strongly recommend against that because you're likely to bust out your rear window doing that. This is your actual trunk in the i8. It's pretty small. Now, luckily you do have the rear seats, and my dad and Cole actually road tripped this car back from Alaska over that several thousand-mile trip, and they had no problem with room. And then the other problem is because you've got that electric motor in the front and it's so slanty, there's no front trunk either. So that's all the storage space you get. So for a grand tourer, if you want to think of the i8 like that, it's not a lot of space to put your grand touring items. Although, apparently Louis Vuitton did do a custom luggage set for the i8 if you're very bougie. So you thought getting into the front seat was hard. Let me show you the back seat. So I'm gonna remove the little seat belt here, and then that does not do what I need it to do. So that folds forward, but doesn't actually slide. So now I gotta manually slide the seat forward with the little button. Oh boy, this is gonna be interesting. Oh boy. Oh, if I whine anymore, it'll sound like I'm on the set of a Broadway musical from the 80s. This is awful. I mean, I know that they probably put these seats in for like insurance reasons, but I don't think a kid could even be back here. I don't think my dog could go back here. My dog's the size of a horse. I don't think a normal sized dog could go back here. So the rear seats are for design and convincing your spouse this is a practical car only. So look, everybody discounts the i8 because they see a supercar and they see 3-cylinder engine on the... So look, everybody discounts the i8 as being not a supercar because they see 3-cylinder turbo engine from a Mini Cooper, right? And they see this amazing style, and it just doesn't add up in their brain. And then they read it's a hybrid, and that brings back thoughts of the Prius and of nerds. And look, as a nerd driving this car, I'm here to tell you, this thing is awesome. It is plenty quick, it is plenty comfortable, it's very hard to get in and out of, but if you can get past that, an excellent daily driver that can be really fun on a canyon road and still deliver you 35, 40 mpg if you're running on gasoline all the time, upwards of 90 or 100 if you're only using gasoline occasionally. This is an excellent machine, so much to the point where my dad bought his dream car, which was a new Porsche 911 Targa 4. We spent over 8 months waiting for it to be built. We spec'd it out. It was a $150,000 car. And then we got this shortly after, and he found himself driving this $48,000 used BMW more than the brand new Porsche because it makes you feel more special. This is more of an experience. It feels more fun than a new Porsche. And you just can't really buy more car for about $40,000 as we tried to do. So that Porsche got sold and the BMW i8 stayed in the stables. So the big question, should you buy a heavily depreciated BMW i8 for less than the price of a new Toyota Camry? Yes. Believe it or not, yes, I think is the answer. This car makes you feel more special and cooler than just about any car I've ever driven, and certainly there's no car for less than 40 grand that'll make you feel better than a BMW i8. It's impractical, and it's low to the ground, and it's hard to get in and out of, but it is phenomenally cool, highly underrated, all-wheel drive, so you can use it as a daily driver. Great gas mileage. I mean, it's just a great machine, and it's proven itself to be fairly reliable over the years. Now, are they going to depreciate below $35,000? Maybe, but I kind of think with this shape and this form factor, you're hard pressed to find one in a few years for cheaper. So I would get them now while they're still fairly affordable before they start rising up in value, because I could easily see these cars being collector's items in 15, 20, 25 years. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Huge thank you to Mary behind the camera. We'll see you in the next one. Okay, you ready? Was that go? Oh! My God. I just sat in that? In the goose feces? New band name, I call it. Cool. Beautiful. Ready? Getting so old. Oh. Pretty good. The elegant. Oh, look good?
Hit it, Tommy.
Hit it, Tommy. Look at this guy.
He was a woman, actually.
That was a woman. If you... That was a bird.